What's up, everybody? I'm John Legend, and today I want to talk to you about jails. As you know, my organization, Free America, is working to end the epidemic of mass incarceration in the United States. What you may not know is that the overuse of jails is a major contributor to mass incarceration. Now, jails are supposed to detain individuals who are serving short sentences or those awaiting trial who either pose a flight risk or are considered a threat to public safety. But the truth is that the majority of people in jail are presumed innocent and can spend an extraordinary amount of time waiting for a trial. Many others are detained in these facilities for the simple reason that they are too poor to post bail. So change is desperately needed, and together we can create a new reality. The MacArthur Foundation has launched the Safety and Justice Challenge to help cities rethink the structure of the criminal justice system and reduce the use of jails in America. So today we're going to discuss 5 facts we should all know about jails, and we're going to learn what solutions the Philadelphia Safety and Justice Challenge site is implementing to reduce the city's reliance on jails. So I am joined by 3 leaders from the city of Philadelphia. We have Julia Wertheimer, Chief of Staff for Criminal Justice for the City of Philadelphia. We have Kelly Hodge, the District Attorney for the City of Philadelphia. And we have the Honorable Marcia Nyfield, who is the President Judge of the Philadelphia Municipal Court. I'm also thrilled to be joined by Khalil Cumberbatch, Associate Vice President of Policy at the Fortune Society. So let's start with understanding the enormity of the problem. There are roughly 11 million people admitted to jail every year in the United States. That's the equivalent of everybody living in New York City and Los Angeles combined. So, first of all, I think it would be helpful, District Attorney Hodge, if you could tell us the difference between jail and prison.
Thank you. John, you hit on it already in the introduction a bit. Jail is really a function for localities and individual communities to go ahead and detain individuals based on an arrest for presumably a short period of time. Normally it's pre-trial, or if it's post-trial, it's usually something that's under 12 months that someone may be serving or waiting to go to a program. Someone in a prison is actually in the prison when a more extended period of time, a state sentence as we often refer to it, and in those areas they're usually located around the state. They're run by the state, and so it's not run by a local sheriff's department, which is how jails are run. And so that's mainly the difference. It's the nature of who's managing it and running it, and also the people who are in the incarcerated status, what their length of time is in terms of where they are situated at that point.
And nobody in a prison is pre-trial, correct? Or is everybody in the prison someone that's already been convicted?
Normally everyone, I don't like to use all blanket statements, but normally everyone who has been transitioned into the prison state system has completed their pre-trial and presumably trial status. They're in a post-trial status, a verdict has been decided, a sentence has been rendered, and then they're going into the prison system. I will say the caveat or kind of the carve-out for that is if someone potentially may have still a pending case in another jurisdiction that's pre-trial, they could have a state sentence, and maybe for some reason they are transferred to the state and then will have to be brought back to another locality for that case to be taken care of.
So let's talk about that number, 11 million people, the same number of people that live in New York and LA combined. Why is that number so high? And are people committing more crimes than they have before? Like, what's the reason why we have that number, 11 million people who are admitted into jail every year in America?
Yeah, so I think that it's important to understand the context, right? I mean, 11 million people could be 11 million individuals, or it could be 11 million people cycling in and out of the system.
So it could be the same person counted twice.
It could be the same person counted twice, 3 or 4 times, and as we know in many municipalities across the country, that is indeed actually the case. But I think a really important statistic to point out here is that in 1983, out of 100 individuals, this is 1983, we had an influx of many, many things happening, right? For every 100 people who had contact with the criminal justice system, only about 53 of them actually ended up in jail. And now, fast forward to 2012, out of 100 people arrested, 95 of those people end up in a jail. And so it's not because more people are committing more crime, it's because we have relied on the criminal justice system, but law enforcement specifically, to react to the many of the social economic ills that actually lead to people actually committing crimes. And so now we've built a system that is so encompassing that when it is designed to address all of these issues, that its only response is to jail them, to lock them up, put them in a jail, and let them get the services that they need.
So crime has actually gone down during this period, but we're using jails more than ever.
Crime has gone down, undoubtedly. That's statistically the same all across the board. But the reality is that we have also defunded many other systems that we relied on in the past.
So where would people have gone beforehand? They might have gone to a drug treatment program or some other program that would divert them from actually going to jail.
So I think that the system that kind of reflects this the most is the mental health system. The
Okay.
way that we used to have a system in place 40 years ago was that if someone was identified as having a mental illness or a mental health issue, there was an entire system with trained people, people that understood that this was an illness and that people needed treatment, and they dealt with them in that way. Now we just lock those people up and hope that the jails and prisons can actually address that, when in all actuality they can't.
Okay. So how does Philadelphia sit within the national context, and how are you working to reduce the use of jails?
So Philadelphia actually still has the distinction of being having one of the highest incarceration rates among the largest cities. However, we've been working collaboratively for a while under the Safety and Justice Challenge to reduce our jail population. As of this morning, we had a 16.5% decrease within the past 2 years from where we started at our benchmark. It's steadily declining while crime rates are holding steady or declining as well. And we have 19 different strategies that we're looking at. So they involve alternatives to cash bail. They involve addressing violations of probation. They involve other diversion opportunities and kind of looking across the system with a pretrial focus, because that's the primary use of jails, but trying to address all different aspects of the system to safely reduce our jail population.
Is there any kind of learnings that you all have developed where you have identified which of these interventions kind of have more impact than others?
I don't know that we're far enough along within the Safety and Justice Challenge to identify numbers, but there's certainly diversion programs that have been very popular in Philadelphia that we utilize for a number of years, that we're utilizing more extensively through MacArthur, certainly including felony diversion of individuals charged with delivery of drugs for young individuals who actually are in it more for the business than the fact than they were in it because of the drug problem. So we recognize that employment is a really huge issue, and we partnered with a nonprofit agency which is providing vocational training and services and GED, and so it's really been successful. And the other diversion programs, through the Safety and Justice and outside, we actually now divert 40% of the individuals charged with misdemeanors to diversion programs, so that individuals have the opportunity not to have a criminal record, to have the charges withdrawn, and if they remain out of trouble after a year, to actually have charges expunged from the record permanently.
Great. So in jails across the country, 3 out of 5 people are awaiting trial and are legally presumed innocent. So if our legal system dictates that an individual is innocent until proven guilty, why can someone be held in jail while they're awaiting a trial?
Well, the two key factors for most, if not all, jurisdictions when they're considering bail and someone being released on bail, because there's levels to bail, is whether or not the person's going to return to court and safety to the community. And it's a balancing of those things. And within those two criterion that you're looking at, you're then looking to see what factors are going to inform you as to whether or not this person will return back, and if not, what do you need to put in place in order to go ahead and incentivize them or make sure that they will return back. You may want to attach various conditions on bail, but make the bail relatively low. You may say the safety issues or concerns outweigh a bail amount, and so therefore you want to go ahead and need to keep them in custody. And so those are the things that kind of go into the mindset of a person who is considering what bail amount someone should have, or whether there's an argument amongst the attorneys as to whether or not bail should be reduced or reconsidered at a later time.
Is it ever considered what the person's ability to pay is, what their income is, what their for some people, a couple $1,000s is a lot of money, and would represent something that's would break them and their family if they had to pay it. But for other people, like me, if you charge me $2,000, I'd be out in a second. So in many cases, people are getting punished for being too poor to afford something that other people could most certainly afford.
I think that if you look at the rules in Pennsylvania, certainly one's ability to pay is in fact one of the identified criteria that the person setting bail needs to consider. There are times when defense attorneys actually make an argument when a judge attempts or a magistrate is setting bail, suggesting that a lesser amount would still ensure the individual's appearance at trial, and suggesting an alternative that would result in the individual having the opportunity to be released from custody pre-trial, as opposed to being detained because they can't afford the money.
So Khalil, can you speak to what kind of impact this may have on an individual?
Yeah, sure. So there was a recent report that was just released called Detaining the Poor. I think this, again, a statistic is really helpful here. And so in that report, it outlined that the average bail amount nationwide for felony conviction, for felony charge is about $10,000. And they also outlined in that same report that the average person detained, that it would take 8 months of their income to pay a $10,000 bond or bail. And so that is the problem in and of itself. And I would also mention that most jurisdictions across the country actually do have a statute that says that one's ability to pay should be taken into consideration, but that doesn't mean that it is always taken into consideration. We do know for a fact that there are jurisdictions across the country where that is the least thing that is taken into consideration. And so what this does is when you take someone out of the community, they have a family that is normally attached to them, they have children, other family members, community. And so these are folks that are taxpayers, these are folks that largely contribute to society in some shape, form, or fashion. We know for a fact that here, for example, in New York City, that 80% of the people held on bail pre-trial are African American or identify as being Hispanic. And so what that means is that you're taking people not out of the society in general, you're taking them out of communities of color specifically. And so we all know that when you remove people from very tight-knit communities, there's a bunch of tentacles that are attached to that person. And so you're impacting not only them, their family, but also the community at large.
So nationally, nearly 75% of those detained in jail are there for low-level offenses. 64% have mental health problems, and 68% suffer from substance abuse problems. But these don't sound like people that we should necessarily keep in jail. You hear statistics like this, and it's hard to believe that so many people are locked up for low-level offenses or because they likely have untreated mental health or substance abuse problems. Why does this happen?
Well, in Philadelphia, I think we're actually trying to change that from happening. We're trying to create alternatives, recognizing that things like addiction or behavioral health problems are actually medical issues and not criminal behavior. So we decriminalized marijuana a while ago. We've decriminalized several other nuisance offenses about a year and a half ago, like disorderly conduct, obstructing the highway, and so that takes them completely out of the criminal system. And if they weren't getting arrested for it in the first place, it could lead to arrest down the road. We also have several initiatives modeled after the LEAD program in Seattle, Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion, that identifies folks who have behavioral health or substance abuse related issues and actually gives the police officer the ability to help divert them into treatment, and not once but twice or 3 times, understanding that they might not seek out that help that first time. And in addition, we're working hard with our jails, because there are a lot of people in jail with behavioral health problems, to try to create a better continuum of services so they can be released safely into the community and get the help they need in the community.
So, in case you don't know, folks, DAs have a lot of power, district attorneys have a lot of power when it comes to how this whole system behaves and performs, because in a lot of cases they control a lot of the deals that are made with defendants. And I want to know, how are the DAs and the court working together to find a new path forward through this safety and justice challenge?
Well, with power comes great responsibility, and so we know that there's a great responsibility to, in essence, reduce victimization. We work closely with the courts. The work that is done in the criminal justice arena cannot be done in a silo, so DAs alone or any prosecutor's office alone cannot try to turn the tide or right the ship towards improving on the numbers that Julie has already mentioned as to what we're doing in Philadelphia. So we're moving in that direction. We have a lot of programming. The issues you have presented through the questions you shared, they're complex issues. Mental health is complex. Behavioral health for young people is complex. The things, substance abuse, are complex, and they're often intertwined. And you need to try to go ahead and undo this intertwining of these issues. And so we have various courts, or rather various diversion programs that are specifically geared that the district attorney's office has either initiated or worked with the courts and partnered in order to create them to really address the specific root problem.
And if I could just add, you know, the courts and the DA, along with the Defender Association in Philadelphia, have a really long history of working together to try and problem solve. And beginning in 1987, actually, Philadelphia was the first location to have a drug treatment court throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and there were only a couple other nationally, you know, at that point in time. So what we're doing with the Safety and Justice Challenge in many ways is an extension of the things that we were doing, and I think that the model that we learned from that type of program taught us the need to address the root causes within society that may have caused people to offend in the first instance, and by addressing issues such as mental health or drug treatment and, mental health issues or drug issues and requiring treatment that is supervised by the court with the assistance of DAs and defense attorneys who support that type of model, we've really seen some incredible successes.
Great. So jail has disproportionately impacted communities of color. While African Americans and Hispanics together make up 30% of the general population, they account for 51% of the jail population. So this is something I have seen firsthand through my listening and learning, and something I'm sure you all have seen through your own experiences and some of you with your own families. So Khalil, how does it happen that so many black and brown people are in jail?
Yeah, so we have this thing called broken windows policing theory. And so the over-policing of certain communities of color is exactly why this happens. So for example, in New York City, when we were at the height of our stop, question, and frisk era, the New York Police Department stopped about 680,000 people. And out of those out of that number, 88% of people had actually done nothing wrong. 87% of them actually identified as being black or Hispanic. And now, after we've implemented many reforms, the police have recently reported that they've stopped question and frisk about 12,000 New Yorkers, but still 88% of them identify as being black and Latino. And so we still have a disproportionate representation in the criminal justice system in terms of who the police encounter. So over-policing in certain communities and under-resourcing those same communities. So you over-criminalize those folks and you put more boots on the ground. And so when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so that's what law enforcement is going to do if you put them in any community.
So what can we do? What can cities do to address this disparity that communities of color have to experience every day? What are some of the lessons that you all have learned through your work?
So I think the first thing that's important to do is recognize that we as a system come to understand that there are racial, ethnic, and economic-based disparities that persist in the justice system, and we're specifically focused on reducing them.
And do you all measure these things? Is this something that you actively measure? Is that something you've been doing for years, or is it part of this challenge?
We're working on setting up a data system to measure it. It's one of the initiatives. It takes a while to pull data from antiquated government systems, but we are trying to pull that together so we can look at it and understand where disparities start and where they persist. It's also things like doing bias training for all the criminal justice agencies, so not just for police, but for the jails, for probation officers, for the courts, for the DAs, for the defenders, and customizing it to each agency. I also think it's important that we as a city, maybe outside the challenge, but in all our work together, address the root causes that we've talked about. So it's the reason why our mayor has invested in things like pre-K and community schools, because we know education to employment are the things that help people stay out of the system in the first place.
I remember the study that came out of the Ferguson case identified that there were a lot of people being locked up because they were targeted for fines, and then once they couldn't pay the actual fines, then the fees kept piling up and eventually they would get locked up because of that. Is that something you're seeing in Philadelphia as well?
Actually, we do not arrest people for non-payment.
Okay.
We do not see any of those individuals counted within our prison system.
Okay.
And if somebody is picked up for non-payment of fines with regard to the traffic division, they're brought before somebody. They are specifically not held. They will be brought before a judge to see what kind of payment plan can be put back in place. Incarceration is clearly not the answer.
Got it. Great. So the bail system perpetuates a cycle of poverty and incarceration. A typical bail amount in the U.S. is the equivalent, as we said, of 8 months of income for a detained individual. So what kind of impact do you see the bail system having on families and communities?
So again, I mean, when you put someone in a system and that system is asking for money to release them, and if that money is $2,000, as you mentioned, and when someone is poor or they have low income, $2,000 may as well be $2 million.
Yeah.
And so families are forced to either make a decision of getting their family member out of jail or letting them languish in a system that, quite honestly, is not there to actually help them in any shape, form, or fashion in terms of re-entering. And so if you look at the case of Khalif Browder, this is a prime example of how the system can ravish an individual, impact his family, and ultimately impact his community.
And a lot of times the threat of holding someone in jail is used as a lever to get them to plea bargain and rather than fight their case in court. So how often do you see that happen?
I mean, I think that, you know, when you are looking at the court system and you're looking at what is involved, you need to focus on individuals and trying to address the individualized behavior to best serve that person. We're all here and sitting here and conversing on this subject, which thank you, John, for bringing us together to have this conversation to really see how we can improve the justice system and how we can go ahead and continue turning the tide. And what you have noted and what we note is you do need to look at individuals. Yes, their economic ability, their ability to afford their livelihood, their ability to afford to get out of jail if they've encountered a situation, and their presumption of innocence is there and it carries with them. I was a public defender before I became a prosecutor. That is something that is intrinsic in our democracy. And so with that being said, we really need to make sure that we look at individuals, see what their circumstances are, and try to address them holistically. And I think that's what we're all trying to do with the services and the sharing of information that's so critically important to really addressing what you have brought us here today to discuss, which is how we can improve the criminal justice system.
So what alternatives to cash bail can we use? Let's talk about that. How is Philadelphia thinking about this issue and trying to address the issue of cash bail?
One of the things that we're doing through the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge is we set up what we call EBR, which stands for Early Bail Review. And what we're doing is we are identifying people who are detained within a couple days of their release. If they have no other holds, they have nonviolent offenses, and they have bail in an amount of $50,000 or less, which would require them to post 10% of the amount. And we are scheduling hearings within 5 days before a judge. We've seen really promising results. We've seen that 85% of the people who appear for those hearings are released. We have many individuals who are released without any conditions, but we also have been working with our pretrial so that there are some people who are released who are required to report to pretrial, and it's up to pretrial to supervise them during the time that they're out on bail. Of the people required to report to pretrial, approximately 90% have followed that directive, and again, approximately 90% of the people released have showed up in court at the first appearance. So we're really heartened with the results so far.
So have you found there are particular strategies that help kind of incentivize people to make sure that they show up when they're supposed to show up? Because I think the general understanding by the public is that the only way to do that is through cash bail. But I'm sure there are other ways to make sure people come back.
Well, I think that there are a couple things that are in place. First of all, having a hearing in front of a judge, you know, within a couple days, who is reinforcing the opportunity that they're being given and the importance that we're trying to level the playing field, because when I did the hearings for the entire year, when we first started last July, I made a point of telling the individuals that I recognized that they were there because they didn't have money, and other people who might have had similar funds would have been released on bail, and that the importance of showing up. We also send reminders in Philadelphia via text You know, there are also robocalls that are sent out, so there are various things that are being done. And for those who are under pretrial supervision, they are also reminded in that way. Obviously, we want to cut down on the people who are not showing up for court so
Yes.
that the cases can properly move forward for a resolution.
And I'll quickly add that I think it's a matter of really going ahead and talking to listen to the people and seeing what their need is. So if they come before the court and they say, this is my circumstance, this is what I need help with, then you can better tailor that bail condition, or maybe decrease the amount of bail to provide a condition and say, you can go to this and do this, and kind of seek the help in advance, then that will go ahead and go a long way towards incentivizing them to work on improving their circumstance, and obviously, societally, we're all benefiting from that.
Well, unfortunately, I think that's all the time we have for today, but we're going to continue this conversation about jails, about mass incarceration, on my new Facebook group, on my personal page. We'll use the group forum to ask ourselves tough questions about how we can create meaningful change in our communities, providing opportunity instead of incarceration. So I want to thank all of our panelists for joining me today. I hope you really got a better understanding of what's going on in our jails and how they play a big role in the criminal justice system. Thank you.